You're watching the KGP pregame show, live from the KGP studios in downtown Cambridge, Ohio. Your source for the latest local sports highlights, interviews, and information. Brought to you by Buffalo Wild Wings and Caleb Graham Productions. And now, let's go live to the guys in the studio.
We'd like to welcome you to the KGP pregame show, coming to you live from Caleb Graham Productions studio, where I'm merely Tom Strasser, and I am honored to be joined by my partners in crime, Heath Dawson, D-Train, Darren McCullough, and my sidekick, Kirby Graham. And fellas, week one of the high school football season in the books, and we're going to take these next 45 minutes or so and look back at what happened in week one for the local teams and then look ahead to week two. And fellas, we'd like to start with the Indian Creek Cambridge game. Now, Heath, Cambridge home opener, new scoreboard, a lot of excitement. They redid the track, new lights, big crowd, a lot of excitement, but maybe it kind of overwhelmed the young Bobcats.
Oh, yeah. I talked to Coach Lowry this week, and some of the things that he said that just too many mistakes for them in their season opener. He said that Indian Creek was playing pretty much on a lopsided field the whole game, particularly the first half. So he said that's some things that they need to shore up. But he did say that the home crowd was awesome and that the atmosphere, the new field, the turf there and the scoreboard, there's some nice things that's going on there. But I think he'd be the first to tell you they got some things to work on after being blanked in the season opener 27-0.
And Kirby, you look at the Bobcats, the one thing that'll bite you on the backside, especially early in the season, is penalties. Cambridge had 11 penalties for 140 yards. Tough to get anything going offensively.
Well, sure it is. And Coach Lowry in the paper was also quoted as saying that he knew coming in that the defensive line for Indian Creek was going to be very stout, and they did not disappoint, as they gave up, or they took away, negative 17 yards rushing for Cambridge, which is just phenomenal. But the penalties definitely continues to kill drives, continues to set you back on offense, and they were just not able to overcome.
Yeah, in D-Trade, Cambridge had 42 yards total offense, 59 passing, as Kerbo said, negative 17 rushing. Credit Indian Creek. If you have negative 17 rushing, you're sacking the quarterback a good bit.
Yeah, it sounds like their defensive line pretty much dominated up front, and whether you're playing Biddy League all the way to the pros, you have a strong defensive or offensive line, you're going to control that side of the football. And we could probably look down the list of all of our games we're going to talk about tonight, and that was the difference in all of those games. Cambridge will get it figured out. They got a good quarterback in C.J. Moore. He was their quarterback last year, so he's got some experience. They've got some young receivers. I know that the Valentine kid graduated, but they'll get things figured out, and I'm sure they're amped up and ready to go week two against John Glenn.
And Cambridge doing some different things offensively this year. But, Heath, we talked about the defensive line for Indian Creek. The one thing Cambridge really had trouble with was the blitz. Indian Creek blitzed them a lot. And we'll look ahead later to John Glenn. That's something Cambridge is going to have to take care of this week in practice, because they're going to keep seeing the blitz until they show they can handle it.
Yeah, Coach Lowry did say that Indian Creek's front just caused a lot of problems. But he did feel that his kids made some mistakes to help him as well, and he feels like there's a lot of things that they can work on. I asked him this week, I said, what's something that you got to work on moving forward? And he said, our offense and special teams just put ourselves in bad situations. He said we weren't able to move the ball offensively. Now that goes back to Indian Creek with that defensive line being very gifted and causing some fits for him, but he said we have to fix that. And then the other thing he told me, he said penalties and special teams just put them in so many holes all night long. So that's some things I think they're going to work on, is stopping that defensive front, trying to figure some things out there. The penalties, the special teams are some things they're going to work on moving forward.
And Indian Creek, a very experienced team. They're a team that's expecting to have an outstanding season. And Kirby, we talked about the offense. Coaches like to find positives, and I think Cambridge found a lot of positives on the defensive side of the ball, because offensively you're not getting anything going, but defensively they forced a few turnovers, and it was only a 14-0 game at halftime. So defensively they were on the field all night. Really, the score is deceiving as far as how good the defense played.
Yes, Tommy, Indian Creek only scored a touchdown each quarter. Now, I say only, that's still 27 points, but it wasn't like Cambridge gave up 40 in the first quarter and then the game was over in a blowout. They hung around, they stayed around, but like we had talked about earlier, when you have that many penalties, it's just impossible to get anything going offensively. So I think Coach Lowry probably is fairly pleased with how they played defensively. And as he said in some of his newspaper quotes, they have to get better offensively, and as Heath just told us, on special teams as well.
And D-Train, I'm sorry, Heath.
Yeah, Tommy, adding to what Kirby said, that's one of the things I did talk to Coach Lowry about. I said, hey, what's the one area that you were pleased with? And he echoed what Kirby said. He said a third of the game went really well for us. Mm-hmm. He said our defense played really well, and he said, I'm really excited about our defense. He said the whole first half, he said Indian Creek basically had the ball inside the 30-yard line, which obviously we know, short field, they're going to score. He said it could have, this is a quote from me, he said it could have been 56-0. So he said they had the ball once inside the 10 after a muffed punt, once inside the 20 after an interception, and he said they had a short field way too much, but our defense only gave up one legitimate touchdown. So again, like Herb said, defense, he was really proud of his defense. Yeah,
and the one thing we know about Coach Lowry, he'll have these guys, again, ready to go, and he took a lot of it on himself, and I respect him a lot for doing that. But you got to give Indian Creek a lot of credit because, like we said, very experienced team, and they were able to take advantage of some of the new stuff Cambridge is trying to work offensively. But defensively, Bobcats, they're going to be able to keep themselves in the game if they can get things going offensively. And D-Train, I was going to ask you, as a coach, you opened the season with a tough loss. But as you look ahead to week 2, you're getting to play one of your local rivals, and the John Glenn Muskies. So does it kind of, as a coach, are you kind of glad you've got a big rival game right out of the gate in week 2?
Well, I guess the good news for both John Glenn and Cambridge, the next points they score is going to be the first points they score this year. So they're going to kind of get that monkey off the back a little bit. But, I mean, that Cambridge-John Glenn rivalry, whether it's football, basketball, badminton, horseshoes, whatever it is, it's going to be a battle and it's going to be a dogfight. Now, I guarantee that, again, McFarland Stadium is going to be packed. Or no, actually, it's at Muskingum University. Muskingum University is going to be packed. I mean, it's going to be definitely sold out. Both those teams are going to be amped up, ready to play. Like you said, when rivalries meet, it doesn't matter what happened week 1 or the first 9 weeks of the season. If it's week 10, both teams are going to be fired up and ready to play, and I guarantee it's going to be a barn burner.
And again, Heath, Cambridge, 140 yards in penalties. And like I said, you hear some of this stuff and you look at the score. You for the Bobcats, you got to say, hey, there is a lot of positives that come out of that, right, because that's a lot of yardage to hand Indian Creek on top of the turnovers. But what can Cambridge do to get their rushing game going? Because, you know, they showed they could pass the ball some, but you've got to be able to set up the passing game with the rushing attack. And they've got to find it because John Glenn's going to come in defensively. They played well enough to beat Meadowbrook. If you would ask Coach Edwards for John Glenn, hey, we'll give Meadowbrook 14 points. And he would have said, hey, game on. Right, we'll take the victory.
That's 100%.
They were shut out. So you've got two teams that's, you know, offensively really trying to find themselves, but defensively feel pretty good where they're at.
Right. I think you said it earlier, Train, is that it's going to be one in the trenches. So John Glenn up front offensively, that's where it starts. When you say what can they do to get that run game, it's got to be up front to get some protection. Obviously, C.J. Moore, he had hit on 4 of 8 passes for 59 yards. So obviously they're probably going to want to expand on the passing game just a little bit as well. But I mean, negative 17 yards rushing is unacceptable from any program, even if you threw for 500 yards. So I know up front, Coach Lowry really wants to see his road graders do a better job of protecting and opening up some holes. And of course, the running backs, if there's holes, they've got to be able to have that vision to hit the holes. So I think you'll see, usually that week 1 to week 2 in high school football is the biggest area of improvement you ever see. And I think Coach Lowry's team will definitely be ready this week.
Well, Tommy and fellas, I'll interject here. In the Meadowbrook game, early on, it was a tremendous struggle for Timmy Ferguson and the Colts to get any kind of a ground game going. Yep. I mean, that didn't come until a little bit later in the game. So I look, as Dee said, that this game is going to be all about the trenches. And once again, like it usually is every week, turnovers and penalties will play a big factor in this upcoming game. And I look for a very low-scoring contest where a critical mistake could cost you the game.
Yep.
Yeah, Coach Edwards for John Glenn, Matt said, hey, he thought they lost the game to Meadowbrook on the line. He thought the offensive line of Meadowbrook and the defensive line of Meadowbrook, that was the difference. And Heath, the one thing that really you could tell stuck in Coach Matt Edwards' crawl, so to speak, was John Glenn's defense. Like we said, they played outstanding. They forced 4 turnovers, and John Glenn had 0 points to show for it. And that was really a tough pill for them to swallow.
One of the biggest things was defense. Meadowbrook got so many big stops against them, and I think Coach Edwards would say, we let Meadowbrook dictate what we were doing, especially on 4th down. Yeah. They turned the ball over 4 or 5 times on downs, and a few of those times were deep into Meadowbrook's territory. Yeah. So I felt like, if John Glenn could have sustained their drives and got a big 4th down, 1st down, they could have been in a much different situation. So I bet Coach will say this week that they have to convert on key 3rd and 4th downs this week.
Yeah, and John Glenn, they had some success in the air. They threw for over 100 yards, Kerbo. But the one thing, the leading rusher for the Muskies, and how often have you been able to say this in the last 20, 25 years for John Glenn football? The leading rusher for John Glenn, I believe, was Meade. He had 35 yards rushing.
Yeah, that's right. And usually in a ground game, they will pound you, and they have good quickness at that position normally. But as we was talking before we went on air, I think some of the things that John Glenn has got to catch up with is the line play is good, but the skilled position players are young. They don't have a ton of experience. Yep. But as they get that experience, if your line play is good, you can win some ball games. So I look for them to improve rapidly.
I would touch on that, Curb, as when I talked to Coach Lowry, I said, what do you expect from John Glenn this Friday? And that was one of the things he said. It's going to be another tough matchup. So he knew up front that they were going to do some things. He said they're fast, athletic, good defensively. Anthony Perkins, he's really concerned about Perkins. He said he's a tall wide receiver and a very tough matchup for us. And then he also noted Brady Emerson. He said he is a good athlete, and we cannot let him run wild on us. Yeah. So they know about their athletes, but again, like you say, I think if they can do some things up front, I think John Glenn will see a much different success on the ground this week.
And Emerson's actually going to Ohio State for baseball. He's a senior going to Ohio State next year, so pretty impressive there, having a D1 athlete in the area. Now he's got a brother, it's a freshman that's just as good as athlete, was on Team USA.
Now, D-Train, do you look for John Glenn to look to go up top on Cambridge through the air? They took some shots against Meadowbrook, and Evan Williams, he can throw the football. He's got a strong arm, just missed a couple of guys open deep. Do you look for them to try to stretch the field against Cambridge as well? Because you got to think Cambridge is going to try to take away the run first.
Yeah, they're definitely going to look for the opportunities when they present themselves. But I think the best part of John Glenn's game Friday against Meadowbrook was the intermediate game. those 5 to 10 yard passes. I mean, there was a few drives where they just picked apart, and then they kind of, for a few times, got a little greedy and tried making a play down the field and it didn't work out, and then they kind of put themselves back up. And the other thing I found was a little bit surprising is that a lot of their kids had some cramping issues. Normally, week one,
they did.
we're sweating big time, but it wasn't too extremely hot. So I think that's something that Coach Edwards is going to look at and correct this week.
And guys, as we head to our first break, I'm going to ask you, all three of you, give me one key for John Glenn and Cambridge that, they have to do well to get the win. Heath, we'll start with you.
Cambridge is offensively. I mean, they've got to have a better balanced offense. I mean, that's first. Yeah. Second, for John Glenn, I think what they have to do well is kind of what Darren said, just expand upon what they did well against Meadowbrook, and I think they'll be fine.
D-Train?
Cambridge, they -17. They got to establish the run. The running game, I mean, they've had a lot of stud backs back throughout the years. It's time. I'm sure the Bobcats, they want to pound you into the ground with a good, solid running game. As far as John Glenn, I mean, I think the weapons are there. They just kind of got to mesh together. And I think once the pieces to the puzzle come in, like you guys have been saying, is they're going to take off. And I think they're going to be a completely different team in the second half of the year.
And Kerbo, you'll be the closer.
All right. Battle of the trenches. I'm going to keep coming back to that. Whoever wins the battle of the line and the battle of turnovers, I look for them to win a very low-scoring game.
All right, you're watching the KGP pregame show, getting you set for week 2. When we come back, we'll talk about the Buckeye Trail Warriors. We'll step aside and be right back. Welcome back to Caleb Graham Production Studio for your first KGB pregame show, sponsored by Buffalo Wild Wings. And we want to thank them for sponsoring our show this evening. In the first segment, we talked about Cambridge and Indian Creek, and then previewed the Cambridge-John Glenn game this Friday night at Muskingum University. Now we want to move out to East Guernsey and talk about the Buckeye Trail Warriors, who got a big victory during the Noble County Fair, their annual battle on Thursday night with the Caldwell Redskins, a 12-7 victory. And Heath, as all coaches, Coach Donnie Kearns was pleased to get the first win under their belt.
Yeah, one of the funniest things talking to Coach Kearns this week, he said a quote, he said, as Urban Meyer says, the best thing about being 1-0 is the chance to go 2-0. So Coach Kearns was very pleased about getting the season opening win for sure. So. And
Kerbo, I always think in weeks 1 and 2, more games are probably won and lost because of special teams. And both teams' special teams showed up with the Warriors and Redskins last Thursday.
Yeah, they both were very special in regards to punt returns. Braxton Dudley had an 85-yard punt return for Caldwell for a touchdown, and then Franco Rome had a 71-yard touchdown on a punt return. So it's rare enough to see one in a game, but to see two in a game, one from each side, really good. And really, it's about the only way the team scored was through their punt returns.
Yeah, and Heath, a big drive late, right before halftime, gave Buckeye Trail their second touchdown, or actually their first touchdown. Right. Franco Rome's punt return came in the third, but that 2-minute drive to close out the first half ended up being big.
Yeah, as we were talking about during the break, they went into a hurry-up offense and scored in a little over a minute. 7 plays, 65 yards. So, that might be a new wrinkle that Coach Kearns looks at this week, is going to that hurry up, as Darren was saying. One of the things that he was saying about the game is he thought one of the biggest things for them is the 8-minute drive to start the fourth quarter. He mentioned that, we didn't hear it on the local media, but he said that 8-minute drive to start the fourth quarter was really what sealed the deal. He said we were able to run the clock, flip the field position, and just control the line of scrimmage. So I think he's going to look to do a lot of that against Newcomerstown this week.
And D-Train, in the first segment, we talked about how well Cambridge's defense played and John Glenn, Buckeye Trail's defense showed up too. They held Caldwell offensively scoreless, giving up the punt return, but they also held Caldwell to 119 yards total offense, averaged 2.8 yards per play.
Yeah, and you know any team that Coach Kearns is going to coach, they're going to be fundamentally sound, and they're going to hit people, and that's just how kind of Coach Kearns as a personality is he's a hard-nosed guy. He wants to grind it down against you, but he will open up the offense more, but he's hard, tough, physical kids. That's what they're about, and you can probably tell in the summer when he's got those guys in the weight room all summer long working on whether speed, agility, strength training, whatever it is.
And Kerbo, we talked about offenses, that are new that, kind of struggled in week one. Buckeye Trail, their probably biggest strength last year was defense. They played a 4-4 last year under defensive coordinator Kyle Cox. Now, defensive coordinator Bill Hartmeyer comes in. They go to a 3-4, but they really seemed to move that a lot quicker and be ready for week one than a lot of the offenses.
Well, and if you think about it, other than the punt return, Caldwell did not score. So obviously the defense played a stellar game. They played a tremendous game. And as you said, 2.8 yards per play. I mean, if you look at that as just an average and look at the numbers, you're never getting a first down. I mean, basically in 3 plays. So yeah, defensively, if he's playing a 3-4, it's working so far in week one.
And Isaac Hickman, Buckeye Trail's quarterback, starting, he rushed for 110 yards and also had a touchdown pass to Ronnie Rominger for the first half. So Hickman showing the ability to be a dual threat.
Yeah, Coach Kearns said he was very pleased with that. One thing that he did point out, though, he said, I thought we could break a few more runs. So that's one of the things where they only scored the touchdown on offense. But he said, I thought we'd break a few more runs, but we didn't. He said, I think some of that had to do with the formations. So you're going to see some different wrinkles this week. He said he called Coach Kelly on Saturday and that he gave him some ideas. So he's getting some insight from some legendary coaches around here. And as Darren said, Coach Kearns will do anything to be ready. So he said they're just going to look at how to get certain plays to go from certain formations. And he said they're definitely going to try to shore that up and become more balanced this week. So look for Trail to do a little bit of different things this week as far as running and passing the ball.
And D-Train, you got to give Heath credit, name dropping. Anytime you drop
exactly
the Hall of Fame coach John Kelly into our broadcast, it's always good for ratings.
Yeah.
And D-Train, we talked about throughout so far this KGB pregame show, the defensive lines and how some teams have really stepped up. Buckeye Trail had 4 sacks. Jack Perry had 1, Ronnie Rominger, Nick Burris, as well as Casey Ruckman. And speaking of Jack Perry, 13 tackles. That's a pretty big night.
Yeah, he was definitely finding the ball Thursday night, that's for sure. Back to kind of piggyback on what Heath was saying, Buckeye Trail's also always been known. They've always had that one horse, whether it's Travis Grafton, the Snodgrass kid a couple years ago. I wouldn't be surprised if Isaac Hickman's the next name that we kind of throw out there as the next horse for Buckeye Trail.
You could go back to 1998 and Coach Donnie Kearns.
Yeah.
He was the cover boy of our Jeffersonian preview issue that year and led the area in rushing that year. So there's a little bit more of a tidbit for you.
Wow.
And that's not the first catalog or magazine that Donnie Kearns has been the main feature on.
I'm sure he'll get a kick out of that.
Just get on Facebook,
Right,
the internet, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But again, Kerbo, we've heard coaches talk about penalties. Buckeye Trail, in their victory, they had 253 yards total offense, but 4 plays, they gained over 100 yards that were brought back. So they lost another 100 yards in offense because of 4 penalties. And again, you kind of expect that early in the season.
Yeah, early in the season, the kids, a little bit of jitters, a little bit of not being able to perform up to their normal standards, let's say, and only scoring 12 points, one of those being a punt return. You know, without those penalties, they may have been able to gap Caldwell a little bit more than they did. But penalties early in the season, of course, any time will kill you. But they're not uncommon in first games. Matter of fact, they're very common.
Right.
And I guarantee if we're talking about this come week 6,
Yeah.
Buckeye Trail's going to be the best conditioned team in the state of Ohio because Coach Kearns is going to be running their tails off.
Yeah, and give the Redskins a lot of credit again defensively.
Yeah.
They played good enough to have a chance to win their home opener during the Noble County Fair and their annual battle with Buckeye Trail. But again, just offensively, again, just kind of shot themselves in the foot as well.
Right, and to go back on what Curb said about some nerves and things, even Coach Kearns touched upon that. He said, I was very nervous going into that game. You go into Noble County Fairgrounds week 1, that's like walking into a buzzsaw. And if you've never played there, teams, they're not used to going in there. There's no locker rooms to change in. It's a different environment. So he said it's just a fair game. He knew Caldwell was going to be fired up. He just said that is a very tough place to play for us. He said, we just got there as late as possible so they could come dressed and ready to play. But still, they had some nerves. He touched upon it. He said, as for the win, it was just great. He didn't care how they got it. He said, a win is a win. He said it wasn't pretty, and it went against their game plan a little bit. So going back to Hickman and running some things, he said, but it just worked for us. But the one thing, like you say about going back to Caldwell, you guys have touched upon it. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but 119 yards of total offense. Coach Kearns said, I was just really proud that we never quit our defense. He said our defense came to play, and we were able to keep a lot of the guys fresh on defense because they set them on offense. So he said the one thing, he goes, we don't care if we let our guys have breaks. As long as our defense continues to fly around the ball like they did on Friday night all year, we're happy. So I think he was really pleased, even though the score might not have been what they thought. They were very pleased with how things turned out down there.
And and Heath, if you go into someone else's backyard, and like you said, in that environment on Fair Week, you don't care if you win 2-0.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can
A win-
see them and
win's
shut
a
them
win.
In
out.
overtime.
You're happy.
Right.
So to bring home a win from down at the Noble County Fairgrounds is a big win for Trail. Congratulations to them for that.
And guys, you need your playmakers to make plays. We talked about the 23-yard touchdown pass to Ronnie Rominger. The Redskins DB defended that very nicely. Rominger went up above him and made a play on the football. It was anybody's ball, and credit
He mossed
Rominger.
him. He mossed him.
Mossed him, yeah. They
much.
got mossed on that because it was very well defended, but Ronnie Rominger was able to make the catch. So you need your playmakers to make plays, and it sets up an interesting home opener this Friday night at the Baker Activity Complex at Old Washington. The Newcomerstown Trojans come in. Now, fellas, early in the summer, people are going, well, hey, that's a win.
Right.
Newcomerstown had lost 24 games in a row. They played Friday night at home against Fairfield Christian, intercepted the first pass, their defense intercepted the first pass of the game, and the Trojans were off and running, led 28-0 in the first half, and cruised to a 41-0 victory. This Trojan team, they're senior laden, they're big, and they're athletic, and they could be a handful for the Warriors Friday night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll give you some credit, Tommy. Off air, you were saying that they run that double tight wishbone. Coach Kearns touched upon that. He said he expects a good Newcomerstown team to come and play really hard. He said, so for the people out there saying, oh, it's just Newcomerstown, we're going to get a win, he was saying, not so fast, my friend, like Lee Corso. Be very cautious. He said they're going to be ready to play. He said Newcomerstown is vastly improved. He said they play an old double-tight wishbone that he played 20 years ago, I believe, for Bill Starr. He said it's old, smash mouth football, and he's going to expect their physicality to come and be shown. So we could see another 12-7 game on Friday night at Trail.
Yeah, and another Hall of Fame name to drop, the late, great Bill Starr. Yes. You're right. But for Newcomerstown, they really pack it defensively, and they bring the heat. And the one thing Coach Kearns pointed out, Newcomerstown, they've put their athletes on the defensive line where they're quick and they're athletic, and they really come at you. Now, Coach Kearns said we could announce this to everybody. Last week, Trail ran the ball a lot out of their favorite offense,
Oh, that's the wing raid offense.
Yes.
The wing raid offense.
The combination of the air raid offense and the wing T. Coach Kern said this Friday night, Buckeye Trail is going to spread it, and they are going to attack with the pass downfield. He feels like their passing game has improved, and it's actually ahead of schedule. And he said, we're going to spread Newcomerstown out and look to attack them downfield. Now, the one thing Newcomerstown does, they put their DBs on an island. They will man up. And if Isaac Hickman, if he can break, gets out and he's not contained, it's awful tough when you're a DB and you've got your back to the quarterback running down the field.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of that, Kerbo and Train, at Meadowbrook this last week.
Yes.
When Meadowbrook was up on that island and John Glenn got broke containment there, they could have scored a couple different times, as we said. But I think if Newcomerstown's not ready, we could see Trail, breaking some long plays on Friday night.
Yeah, but I'm just happy for the Trojans, their coaching staff, their kids. They've kept working, and it's good to see Newcomerstown turning the corner and excited. And this is one of the bigger games of the weekend. And fellas, we'll start with you, Heath. Give me a couple of keys for which team to go 2-0 on the season.
And I want to give a quick shout out to Chad Elliott, one of my good friends, become Newcomerstown's AD coming into this school year. So good job, Chad. But anyways, I think for Trail, it's going to be, as Coach Kern said, they just need to be more balanced this week. Maybe get some more sustained drives instead of shooting themselves in the foot there with the penalties. Like you said, 123 yards that they lost on penalties. So if they can get those things shored up, I think Trail's going to be really in a good position this week. And Newcomerstown, they just got to build off what they did last week. 24 games losing streak. I remember when Meadowbrook went through their a long losing streak of, I think, almost near 3 seasons. When you finally get that win, it really builds some momentum. So I think Newcomerstown just needs to ride that momentum into the stadium and do what they did last week, and I think they'll be all right.
Train?
The big thing with Newcomerstown's 4-4 defense, if Coach Kern's, like Heath said, if he's going to try spreading them out, well, those linebackers that you did have in the box, all of a sudden they're out guarding receivers, and Buckeye Trail have the weapons. Hickman's just got to find them, or if they're not open, take off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as the Trojans, they fly to the football extremely well. And Kerbo, you close it out.
Yeah, and you had mentioned earlier that Newcomerstown puts their best athletes on the defensive line. Well, that's okay if you get there. If you get there, man, you'll be successful. But if you got receivers running wild through the secondary in single coverage, look for Buckeye Trail to have a pretty good night passing the ball, and defensively they did not give up a point other than on special teams. Yeah. So
good point.
I look for a convincing Buckeye Trail victory.
But guys, I want to give you the defensive stat maybe of the night. Last week against Fairfield Christian, Newcomerstown's defense held Fairfield Christian to -7 yards. Total offense in the first half. They can bring it.
There's your stat of the night for sure.
All right, so that wraps up this segment talking about Buckeye Trail. We'll step aside here on the KGP pregame show, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Meadowbrook Colts, their big victory, and their big game coming up, rivalry game with the Barnesville Shamrocks. We'll step aside and be right back. Welcome back to the studios of Caleb Graham Productions for the KGP pregame show. We're looking forward to Game 2 of the high school football season, and we're also looking back at Week 1. And again, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Buffalo Wild Wings, for sponsoring this broadcast this evening. I'm merely Tom Strasser, Heath Dawson, D-Train Darren McCullough, and our closer, Kirby Graham. And fellas, last segment we talked about Buckeye Trail. Now we're going to focus on maybe the biggest game of Week 1 as far as highly anticipated. That was the John Glenn Muskie traveling to Byesville to take on the Meadowbrook Colts. And Meadowbrook comes out with a big victory, 14-0, a shutout. And let's talk about Meadowbrook.
I think the biggest thing was going into the game was, Kohler Clendenning being a first-year coach.
Yeah.
What is his team going to look like? I think that was the biggest question going in. We knew that he had success while he played at Meadowbrook, but was that going to transition to the sidelines? So I saw some really good things from Coach. One of the biggest things is his defensive front. We already talked about that earlier in the night off the air, but I think all of us that was there will attest that their defense, I think just as the game went on, just wore down John Glenn, and I think that's a testament to Coach Clendenning and his staff. So if a little bit of what we saw Friday night gets better in week 2 and just keeps transitioning, this isn't a reloading season. This is going to be another good season.
Yeah, and if you think about it, for Coach Clendenning, you're following the man who was the only man in school history to get the team to the playoffs, win a playoff game, win a home playoff game. And you got to fill those shoes. Now, yeah, you're on his staff and you've learned a lot from him, but now it's your turn. And you've lost some really fabulous football players, and Brady Blattner, Davis Black, and the like. And he didn't seem to miss a beat. I mean, the Colts come out, and when you shut your opponent out, you're doing something right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and guys, having the opportunity and privilege to coach at Meadowbrook with the girls basketball program and watch Coach Clendenning come in and work not only with the guys but female athletes at Meadowbrook as well, and just his passion for coaching. I was happy that he got the job, just tickled to death, and real happy for Coach Clendenning to get that all-important first victory.
Yeah, he's the strength and conditioning coach down there too, so you're talking he's building up everybody from the golfers to the football team to the cross-country runners to the volleyball players. I mean, he's working with all those kids trying to build up that strength and endurance.
And, guys, before we talk about the Meadowbrook offense, offense is something Meadowbrook is where the spotlight has been on them for the last few years, and deservingly so. I think Meadowbrook, over the last few years, defense has been very underrated. And, boy, did they put the spotlight on them against a John Glenn squad, not only to get a shutout, but, Kerbo, for Meadowbrook uncharacteristically to turn the ball over 4 times and you still pitch a shutout, man, the defensive side for Meadowbrook was huge.
Yes, it was. And, they gave up a total of 225 yards of offense. And when you turn it over 4 times, 225 isn't bad. But to hold someone scoreless in spite of the turnovers and in spite of giving up some yardage, it was very impressive. And just to mention here a few guys, Boston Black had 7 solo tackles. Brady Ladd 8. I believe Rhett Dyer, he had a big game. He led the Colts with 9, and Wyatt Rossiter had 8 tackles. Those 4 guys were flying around, and they weren't missing tackles.
No.
That's the key. They were not missing tackles.
Let's point this out. Wyatt Rossiter is a defensive lineman. Your defensive linemen aren't supposed to get 8 tackles.
Right.
They're supposed to take up space. And I tell you what, I thought Jeff Riggins and him were best friends because Jeff Riggins was announcing his name all night long.
And he had a
Friday
sack.
night.
Let's not forget, he also had a sack in the game.
Correct, he did.
And Heath, what can you say about Rhett Dyer? Here's a junior. He's battled some injuries earlier in his career, but to look at this kid, a junior, and voted as one of the team captains, that says a lot.
Well, that just gives me goosebumps because I know Rhett and his family well. His father, grandfather Jerry Dyer, was actually involved with the Living Word where I'm at, and Rhett grew up out there. So I've got to know Rhett as a little kid and seeing him grow up. And honestly, you wouldn't know his age because he carries himself very maturely. And that's one thing I noticed about him on the field the other night too. He wasn't out there woofing it up. He made a play, went right back to the huddle, suited up, was ready to go again. I mean, they were smart to pick him as a leader because that kid is just a natural-born leader for sure.
But I'm an offensive guy, D-Train, and let's talk about the Meadowbrook offense. Josh Hupp stepping in, filling some big shoes at quarterback, 238 yards passing and a touchdown against a pretty tough defense with the Muskies.
It was 271 yards, actually.
271.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
here's the big thing. He had some about size 15 shoes of Davis Blacks to fill. So, I mean, I'm sure Coach Clendenny and the rest of their coaching staff throughout the week are saying, be Josh Hupp. You don't have to be Davis Black. Control what you can do. And I thought he did a fabulous job, took what the defense gave him. Now, there was a couple times where he showed that first varsity start jitters where he kind of maybe forced it into some tight windows. But overall, I thought he did a real good job of controlling the tempo, making sure everybody's in the right places and running the offense.
Especially when you're a sophomore.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's not like he's a junior or senior coming in there. He's a sophomore kid. You know, so you're coming into a program with a lot of success. Like you say, you can't fill Davis's shoes. And then you have back-to-back playoff appearances. So this kid is coming into a very difficult situation for himself. And you wouldn't know after the first few minutes of the game because he didn't show any jitters once he got rolling. I mean, completing 23 of 31. That's pretty impressive. Now, he's got an arsenal of receivers, which a few of them really surprised us as we were talking about.
Well,
but they look good.
Their receivers aren't 100% either.
Right.
I mean, the McCullough kid didn't play on offense Friday night, and Addie Black played sporadically because he had a sprained wrist. So you're talking probably their two biggest receivers weren't there the full time.
Right.
So
Yeah, and an interesting tidbit for all of you in Colt country. Josh Hupp plays in his very first varsity football game as a sophomore the other night, and he completes 23 passes, which ties a school record. The first time you ever step out there in varsity competition. And whose record does he tie? Kohler Clendenning.
No, wow.
His coach, who did the same thing to Barnesville back in 06, completing 23 passes. So I thought it really ironic. Josh's first game, Kohler's first game, Josh ties Kohler's record. So I just thought that was interesting.
I don't know if he's our closer anymore, Tommy. I think he's our starter now. Good job,
he's
Kurt.
both.
Good job.
Starter
Good
and
job.
closer.
Tell you what, driving by Meadowbrook's practice and seeing Josh, I couldn't understand why he was running bleachers while they were practicing. Now that explains it. You do not tie or try to break the head coach's record your first game. But, Kerbo, if you play high school fantasy football and you need a running back that can hit the century mark about every Friday night, Meadowbrook has a good one, don't they?
Yeah, Timmy Ferguson, a 4-year varsity player. I remember his very first game over at John Glenn.
Yes.
Took a kickoff, freshman, takes it to the house. And I'm thinking, boy, that kid's pretty quick. Who is that boy? And he has been fantastic ever since. And the other night he had 127 yards rushing. He had a touchdown, a 2-point conversion. And speaking of Timmy, Timmy is starting to push his way into first place on the record board for most career points. He's 32 short of Brady Blattner from last year. And barring a catastrophic injury, he's going to break and set that record.
Pretty safe to say.
yeah.
And then career rushing yards. We all from Colt country would remember Jake Casper, Coach Casper's
Coach
son,
Casper's
Jake.
son, yep.
Well, Jake has held the record for career rushing for 22 years now. And he had 29-39, and Timmy Ferguson's at 28-41. So if he has a 100-yard rushing game this week, there's your new career leader in rushing. So yes, they have somebody they can really rely on in the running game.
The most interesting thing that I think a few of us talked about was Tim got slow started. He kind of was
Yes, he
dancing
did.
around early in that first quarter, but once he started churning out his yards, I mean, to finish with 6 yards per carry over the night on the night.
Yeah.
I mean, if he would have got off to a really good start, you know, who knows how many yards he would have had. But I mean, I just was impressed with how he just kept running and never give up, especially on that touchdown sweep he had on the left side there to give Meadowbrooks their first score. I mean, he just stayed patient within the game plan, and man, he just kept getting better as the game went on.
Yes, he did.
Well, a little story to follow that up or put the icing on the cake. When I talked to head coach Donnie Kearns for Buckeye Trail, they played Thursday night. I said, Coach, Friday night, I'm sure you went down to see Newcomerstown. He said, yeah. He said, for the first half. And then I seen all I needed to see. I knew we were going to have our hands full. He said, then I made my way back to Byesville
I
for the
bumped
John
into him.
Glenn game,
Yep.
and I said, hey, what was your thoughts of the game? His exact quote, Timmy Ferguson is a beast.
Yeah.
And so, you know,
certainly is.
everybody around notices that. And Meadowbrook, an impressive victory, overcame some adversity, and now they're going to play for a special trophy against a Barnesville team that looked pretty good week 1.
Yeah, Barnesville had an impressive win over Buckeye Local, 33-8. It was 20-8 at the half, and then they outscored them 13-0 going away in the second half. They're going to be playing for the Bill Dallard Trophy. Coach Dallard coached at both Meadowbrook and at Barnesville, and had just came back to Meadowbrook when he was tragically lost his life on the interstate, on Interstate 70. But that trophy is coveted by both schools, and it should be quite a battle.
And this, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the last time Barnesville and Meadowbrook could possibly face each other this year, because Meadowbrook's making the move to the MVL. So kind of the, I guess you could say, the end of a legacy, or the end of...
It could be. It could be, yes.
That'd be sad to see, because that game is just to Meadowbrook people and Barnesville people. It's a sentimental game. And if you know Coach Dower, I was in high school, I believe, when that happened, and he just treated everybody so wonderfully. So it will be sad if that game is discontinued, but let's hope somehow that they can figure out a way to keep that game on the schedule.
And Barnesville, 351 yards total offense against Buckeye Local, and they held the Panthers to 118 yards total offense. And guys, Barnesville, you would like to see balance. Aiden Hannes, their outstanding quarterback, threw for 3 touchdowns. And their running game of Meade and Lake, they combined for about 170 yards and a couple of touchdowns. So Barnesville showing they can do it on the ground as well as pass. So Meadowbrook, you think it'll be key to make them one-dimensional somehow?
Yeah, and if Meadowbrook in their defensive backs are going to have to probably play a little bit better this week, because there were some drop balls in that John Glenn game that an experienced Barnesville team may not drop, and so we hope that Meadowbrook can rise to the challenge defensively. But I look for a shootout in this one.
I think a few things stand out to me. Is first, as Tommy, you said 4 turnovers. They actually had a 5th right before the half there in the first half. So Meadowbrook had 5 turnovers in that game. And if they do that against Barnesville this week, they're not going to win, because Barnesville will punch it in. They will capitalize. I talked to Coach Clendenning, and I said, what's some things you need to work on this week? And he said one thing is, don't disrespect the football. He said, we felt like at one point that we had more turnovers than points. And it probably did feel that way. A second thing he said was backside. He said, we are an aggressive team, which I like. But he said sometimes we're a little bit too aggressive. He said that, in reference to John Glenn missing those open receivers. So he said overall, though, he said we didn't give up any points. He's happy with that, but he wants to see that backside of the secondary shore some things up this week.
Yep.
And guys, we got 2 teams, again, looking to get to week 3 with an undefeated 2-0 start. Heath, give me one big key for each team if they're able to do that.
For Meadowbrook, honestly, I'd say continue to do what you did the other night. If they can dominate up front on the defensive line as they did, I think Barnesville will have a hard time running against them. If Meadowbrook offensively just holds on to the ball and continues distributing the ball around, I thought that was one of Hupp's biggest thing, was being able to distribute to different receivers. Even though Boston Black had a big game, I think Black had 9 catches for 114 yards and a touchdown, but there was other receivers like Davis Singleton had 7, and then you also had Addie Black with 5. So you had some guys that was able to get in the offense, and then Timmy running the ball. I think if Meadowbrook just stays balanced and do what they do and hold on the ball, I think Meadowbrook honestly will win that game. That's just how I see it happening.
They just got to eliminate turnovers. I mean, if they don't turn the ball over 5 times against John Glenn, who knows what that score is going to be. It was 14-0 final, but all of those possessions they drove, they had 1 in the red zone. I think they were at the 5-yard line.
Yep.
I mean, take care of the ball. Like he said, don't disrespect the football. And I guarantee that's going to be something preached all week. And if they have a turnover, I hate to see those guys Saturday morning, because they're going to probably pay for it.
And let's bring in the closer.
All right, all of the things these guys said, I couldn't agree with more. But I think one of the keys to the game is going to be the Meadowbrook secondary. Can they cover? Can they not give up the top? If they take the top off of Meadowbrook's defense a couple of times and get some quick strikes and then go to that running game that pounds on you and pounds on you, Meadowbrook could struggle. But with that being said, can't root against or pick against my Colts, can I? So I look for Meadowbrook to win in a fairly high-scoring affair.
Yeah.
It ought to be a lot of fun when the Shamrocks travel down to Byesville, Bill Dowler Trophy on the line. It ought to be a huge crowd, a beautiful night for football. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to take our final time out. Once again, we want to thank Buffalo Wild Wings for sponsoring our broadcast this evening, as well as a game ball. Let's give it to KGP makeup crew. Yeah. They are working feverishly to try to make my three partners look halfway decent on camera.
You just can't fix perfection here.
So great job. You know, I do what I do. So for live at the Caleb Graham Production Studios, we'll step aside, and when we come back, we'll wrap things up and get you set for Friday night. Welcome back to Caleb Graham Production Studios for the KGB pregame show. And as we wrap it up this evening, it's now time for our BW3 panel picks. And we're going to give out a couple of game balls. And Kirby, we're going to look at the offensive side. And who gets the game ball for week one in the area?
Well, we had a little bit of a discussion, threw a few names around. But how can you not choose Josh Hupp, Meadowbrook sophomore quarterback, first varsity game in his career, throws for 271, 23 of 31, 75% completion rate, and a touchdown, ties the school record with his coach for completions in a game. So the ball goes to Josh Hupp.
Yeah, and a lot of people we could have picked, but definitely there. So our game ball for our offensive player of the week for week one is a Meadowbrook quarterback, Josh Hupp. Now, Heath, or D-Train, excuse me. Let's go to the defensive side for, I think, a couple of co-players.
Yeah. I mean, you could look at all three teams, Cambridge, Buckeye Trail, Meadowbrook, all had great defensive efforts on Thursday and Friday night. But we decided to go with and that was Buckeye Trail, Jack Perry, and Meadowbrook's Wyatt Rossiter. Jack Perry had 13 tackles and a sack on Thursday night, so he got to know the Caldwell offensive players pretty up close and personal. And like I said earlier, Wyatt Rossiter, he was in that John Glenn backfield all night on Friday with 8 tackles and a sack. So two kids are definitely deserving of a great honor here week one.
So congratulations to Wyatt Rossiter of Meadowbrook and Jack Perry of Buckeye Trail for our game ball on the defensive side. And now we'd like to close it out on our BW3 panel picks with our play of the week.
Many good plays, the same as we talked about offensive defensive players. We could have went with probably a few different plays, namely Boston Black steamrolling a kid for a touchdown the other night, which was pretty awesome. But we went with Buckeye Trail's Ronnie Rominger. How can you not go with him? He hauls in a 23-yard score, going up over the Caldwell defender, as Train dubbed it, Randy Mosting, and basically with 22 seconds left in the half. If that play doesn't happen, Trail loses. Yeah. So Rominger definitely is the play of the week for sure.
Well, thanks for joining us for our KGP first pregame show, and we look forward to coming back next week and look back at week 2 and forward to week 3, and 3 big games locally this weekend. Barnesville traveling to Meadowbrook to take on the Colts, and you have the big showdown, Cambridge traveling to New Concord to battle the John Glenn Muskies, and then the Newcomerstown Trojans go out to the Baker Activity Complex in East Guernsey to take on the Buckeye Trail Warriors in their home opener. Well, for Heath Dawson, D-Train, Darren McCullough, and our closer, Kirby Graham. I'm merely Tom Strasser. Once again, want to thank Buffalo Wild Wings for sponsoring us, and we look forward to seeing you next week on the KGP pregame show.